There's a story that I heard about this old rabbi around Jesus's time. It was after Jesus. But he was walking home one night and there was a little Roman outpost, and it was in the middle of the night, super dark, and he just heard this voice cry out, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And then the rabbi responds with, "How much do you get paid to stand there and ask that question?" The rabbi says, "I'll double it if you stand outside of my door and ask me the same question every morning. Who are you? What are you doing here?" And like there's such a benefit just to asking yourself, who am I and what am I doing here?
What's up, Internet? Welcome back to the podcast. We've made it to 25 episodes. It's kind of a big deal in the podcast world. Not a lot of people make it this far. It's been fun. It's been a long road. Since February was when we started, and now we're here in a week and a half. My family and I are moving cross country, which is really fun and exciting, and I'm excited for it. Once we get back there, I might change up the format a little bit. I got a friend. We may or may not start doing a co-host thing on this podcast, which would be a lot of fun for me. That's, as a lot of you know, how I intended to start, but it just didn't work out that way. It would be a lot of fun if it works out that way. Either way, we're going to keep doing this thing. So if you're enjoying it, keep sharing it. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm going to keep doing it regardless, however we end up doing it. So for now, enjoy this episode that I recorded several weeks ago before the birth of my child, and the next couple are also pre-recorded, so enjoy. Thanks again for sharing and listening and watching and all the things. Peace. What's up, Internet? Welcome back to the Fringe Faith Podcast. Today I'm joined with my buddy Zach. We worked together for the last, year and a half almost.
Yep.
And this guy, he kept me sane. He keeps me sane. It's been good. We a lot of times at break will sit and talk about just gospel and Jesus and fringe weird topics when I bring them up.
Yeah,
Uh,
lots of that.
and he looks at me like I'm a weirdo sometimes, but it's all good. How's it going, man?
Pretty good. Pretty
Yeah.
good.
You just got back from vacation.
I did. Went to Santa Cruz with the family. Got to hang out with the in-laws. And that was nice. It's always good to see the ocean and to be with family. So
Yeah, man.
good time.
Good.
I was not excited to come back, but here I am in the smoke and heat of Reading.
Yeah,
So,
it's hotter than it should be.
yeah, it's pretty brutal.
Hotter than anyone should tolerate. I actually wonder sometimes, like, why did people post up in this valley?
I don't know. Seems like a
Yeah.
bad idea. Especially like driving around now. It's like, why would you want to be homeless here? There's so many better places in California you
Well,
could go and be homeless.
apparently, a lot of the homeless get dropped off here from down south.
Really?
That's there's apparently Reading gets a kickback from the other bigger cities that
Mm,
don't want to have as many homeless, so they ship them up here apparently.
perfect.
Yeah, pretty neat.
Because we totally have the resources to deal with that problem.
Well, they all clearly don't deal with it. They
Yeah.
just kind of let them do what they want. Oh, well, that's not what we why we're here. Um, so one of the things that you and I talk a lot about is sort of biblical literacy. I turned this guy onto Bama podcast, Marty
Mhm.
Solomon and stuff, and he just raced through it. He'll be talking about stuff sometimes. I'm like, whoa, dude, I'm still back in Exodus, dog. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But it's been fun. So what's what's that been like for you, and why is that a big why is it so important to you?
Well, um, I don't know. I think I grew up in the church, and for a long time, I felt like I wasn't getting it. I wasn't having the same experiences as everybody else around me was having. I've, people talk about radical spiritual experiences that they have, and I feel like that was lacking in my life, and even I mean, I walked away from the church for a while, and when I came back after having my son, I just felt like I knew this was correct. I knew that I needed faith, and I knew that Jesus was the truth. Um, but I still felt the disconnect as far as what I was experiencing in my worldview and my reality compared to what other Christians were experiencing and expressing. So, um, yeah, you turned me on to Bema. And since then, I've really fallen in love with the text, you know? I mean, the literary art is just incomparable. There's nothing else like it.
Yeah.
And the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know anything.
Got it.
So, I do feel like I've come a long way, but I feel like barely scratching the surface
Yeah.
with what I have learned. But yeah, it's been an incredible resource, and I don't know. I've been blessed with a lot of good resources. I feel like I don't know. Maybe the Spirit has guided me in the right directions, but things like Bema, there's another podcast, The Bible Show, that
You were already on that one before.
yeah, I've been listening to that one. Lots of good exegesis in that one, and he's definitely Bema takes more of the text and context approach, whereas like the Bible Show will uh, basically point everything towards Jesus,
Hmm.
which I also love, but it's a different approach. And recently, the Bible Project has been another one,
Yeah.
super informative. I love their takes, and it's not that I agree with everything on all of these podcast shows, but it gets me to think, it gets me to wrestle, and it gets me asking questions,
Yeah.
which I feel like I felt growing up in the church that there was not space for questions. You know, there's not space to, because if you question somebody's theology or doctrine, you're questioning faith itself for some reason.
Yes.
Um, but apart from that, since coming back to the church, I've just been blessed with a good pastor. Shout out Chris Light, and a good church family that's been very uh, just encouraging, motivating, welcoming. A lot of the people that I knew when I was kids are still there, so they got to see me come back and they embraced me, which was really good. It was really good for me and my family. So yeah, I mean, it's been it's not anything crazy, but it has been, I mean, it feels like a different life almost that I was living 4 years ago, even to, now. The difference and how I see the world and the reality that we're in and how I want to walk and live, it's drastically changed. So I am grateful, and I'm grateful for people like you, I mean, that was a big hurdle for me is going into the workplace. It's
Yeah.
like it's easy to be a Christian on Sunday morning, but how do I navigate the real world? How do I bring my faith into that place? And I think kind of opening up and conversations with you kind of helped me branch out. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a long, good 4 years for me.
Yeah. Well,
So
I feel like you actually do a little bit better job than even I did. Granted, the guys that I worked directly with, they pretty much kept to themselves.
yeah.
We didn't talk to each other hardly at all. So,
Hmm.
it wasn't like I was sitting there trying to converse with them very often, headphones in. And honestly, I don't know that that was the season for me to do that anyway, because I just spent the last year or so just with headphones in and a podcast,
Yeah.
learning all sorts of stuff. And a lot of it led to me deciding to start this podcast, which
Hmm.
is really cool. And, um, like I found Bema relatively recently. I listened through a ton of Blurry and stuff, and it's just like challenged my paradigm. And that's something you were talking about was challenging your paradigm. You may not always
Hmm.
agree with everybody, but you can at least, dig into to what they're saying and be like, okay, where might they be right?
Yeah.
And that's a thing that I appreciate about you is that even when I come up with something that you think is absolutely absurd or like off the wall, you're like, all right, well, I'll give it a listen.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I don't know. That's the beauty of, I don't know, modern faith right now, I think, is there's a lot of different lives being lived, right? There's a lot of different paths you can take. And sometimes there's no one answer. There's no, one size fits all solution to walking out your faith. And I think, we would all do well to remember not to argue over disputable matters, right? Like we don't need to just like say, I'm right, you're wrong. We could learn from one another, and just
Yeah.
because somebody has a different worldview, a different kind of perspective on their walk, like I want to hear about that. There's things I can learn from that, and sometimes it's challenging in a way that makes me want to shut it down, and argue and get upset because I don't see it that way. But when I really take the time to think about it and meditate on it, the more I come to a place to where it's like I don't need to be upset about it. I can accept that there are different paths, and a lot of times in scripture there's a duality in meaning, I mean, and I don't have a problem with a certain text meaning one thing for somebody and another thing to somebody else, as long as the outcome is fruitful,
Yeah.
as long as it's producing fruit and it's benefiting that person in their walk, then,
Yeah.
then
Yep.
yeah.
As long as it's also not like completely wrecking the context either, too, though.
Yeah, no, I mean it's gotta fit in text, but I mean I think for me the process I'm trying to go for is to start with good exegesis, right? Understanding the text in context, like Bema talks about.
Yep.
And then after that is realizing that the problems, the issues, the idolatry, the selfishness, um, we haven't changed that much.
Yeah.
In the last 2,000, 4,000 years, we're still dealing with the same issues. We're still dealing with idolatry. We're still dealing with selfishness, and we're still dealing with injustice.
Yep.
Maybe on a greater scale. And a lot of times we like to, I don't know if we like to, but you hear Christians talk about the Israelites in the process through the Old Testament and their story arc. And a lot of times we go, oh, silly Jews will never learn. What's wrong with these people? How could they not have learned their mistakes? And,
Mhm.
you know, for me, when I read, say, the prophets, it's not as much as me trying to put myself in the prophet's shoes. Okay, I realize that I'm not the hero in the story, right? I am looking for how can I identify with the problem,
Mm. That's good.
like where does our society fit in this narrative, right? And a lot of the things that the prophets are speaking to are the things that even the church is dealing with today, and they might not realize it.
It's true.
So I don't know. A lot of times we want to fast forward and be like, oh, I'm the one bringing the correction, when a lot of times we need that correction. The message is for us, you
Yeah.
know? Um, so yeah, I mean, yeah, I blasted through Bama. I think I listened through all 5 sessions in like a couple months, probably.
Yeah.
It was overwhelming and probably too much information to even process. I'm trying to kind of go through it a little bit slower, and do more of a study,
Right.
out of it. But it's really just helped me, yeah, just shift my paradigm, my worldview. And it's also made me more accepting of other people's walks and their faith, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome though. That thing you just talked about with the putting yourself in the right perspective when it comes to how you read the different like texts and stuff. Matty Montgomery was preaching not too terribly long ago about David, and he said the thing is us in the church, we tend to want to think that like we're the David and
Uh-huh.
we've got a Goliath to slay.
Yeah.
And he's like, but the reality is when you look at that in context, he was a picture of Christ,
Hmm.
and realistically, in more than not, our Goliaths are to be taken care of by Christ, and then we're supposed to be the soldiers that come in after the giant is slain
Yeah.
to finish off the rest of the.
Hmm.
And that was the point that he made, and I think that's great. And I don't often Like I'll think about like contextually, like, okay, like maybe Ezekiel's talking about this thing and this is how it applies to the world around me, but I think of myself as more like the prophet minded person,
Yeah.
and so I'm like, yeah, get
Yeah.
them.
Tell them how it is. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but in reality, you're right. Like more often than not, we're the people that need to be.
No, if I'm left to my own devices, like obviously I would hope if I'm confronted with any, Goliaths, that the spirit would fill me and I would be able to handle that
Yep.
in a correct way and respond with courage. But I know myself, and I'm probably more like one of the Israelites standing there going, "Oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
who's gonna deal with this guy? He's a monster, you know?" So I don't know. Just I try to identify my weaknesses,
Yeah.
and that's what I want to work on,
That's good.
So it is a temptation to read through the prophets and be like, yeah, get them,
Yep.
but for me it's far more beneficial to just understand my shortcomings and try to, through prayer and just communication and self-reflection and meditation, just allow the spirit to hopefully change those aspects of my life. And I think about spiritual warfare. I was thinking about this today. And for me, there hasn't been a whole lot of like demonstrative experience, of God showing up and doing some radical thing in my life. So for me, all these things that we deal with today, right? Money, greed, right? Power, sex, all of these things. In the biblical narrative, they're kind of viewed as gods. They're symbolized through these different Elohims, right?
Mm.
These different gods, and the spirit of those gods is still very active today. So for me, spiritual warfare is not so much going to another realm with a sword and slashing down demons or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's an internal process,
Yeah.
right? I have to deal with the greed, the selfishness, um, the lust in my own self. That's where the battle's taking place. And um, the only way I can navigate those waters is through the text. I mean, prayer also. But to be honest, I've struggled with prayer in the past
Yeah.
because I don't always walk away feeling as filled up. I feel like I'm talking, but I'm not necessarily receiving.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
um, when I go to the text, though, it's just like, I don't know, like I'm being filled up and I'm being prepared,
Yeah.
to walk out this life. And I think for me, the foundation of all of it is learning to be like Jesus. A lot of times, me and my wife were having this conversation. Um, People want a sermon, a biblical sermon on how to raise your kids, right? When you look in the scripture, I mean, there are some verses that you can apply to raising children, but there's not a whole lot. There's not a guidebook on how to raise your kid. And it's kind of that way with a lot of issues that we deal with today. But I think the answer is if you want to be a good parent, seek Jesus first.
Live
You
out,
know?
yeah, live out the way that God's laid out for you and
Yeah.
just model it for your kids in
hmm
a lot of ways.
Yeah. Seek Jesus. And, like I believe Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of God and all these things will be added to you.
Yeah.
If you want success, I'm not preaching a prosperity gospel, and success does not always look like we think it should look like. But if you want success, if you want to be a good parent, if you want to be a good steward of what God's blessed you with, then you should seek to be like Jesus.
Yeah.
So, how do I know what Jesus is like? Right? Maybe for some people, it's diving into prayer, and, maybe there's more of a dialogue or a bigger experience for some people in prayer, but for me it's learning the text.
Yeah.
And when I start to understand that Jesus is constantly pointing back to the prophets,
Hmm.
to the Torah, right? It's kind of like a revelation of, oh, like if I want to know more about Jesus, I don't need to just isolate him in the Gospels. I can search the text. I
Yeah.
can go back and learn so much more about what he was doing, how he operated, how his worldview worked, how the kingdom of God that he talks about nonstop kind of operates. And it's been very beneficial for me is just to kind of put the text first in my life and
Mm.
really dive into just kind of learning and educating myself and you know the rest will be added,
Yeah.
right? As long as I'm seeking Jesus and to learn more about him and trying to be like him, then I'm not too concerned. I don't need to worry about being a good parent. If I'm behaving like Jesus, it's all good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all gonna work.
So, what are some of the things that you've found that, like, as far as contextualizing, through whether Bema or through otherwise, things that you've learned that have sort of challenged what you thought you knew?
Challenge what I thought I knew. Well, I'm still working through a lot of it. So let's be clear on that. I don't know what I'm talking about. Let's be clear on that as well. I am still very fresh into all this, so I don't want to
Right, but it's a
offend,
process.
but it is a process. So I think one thing I've come up against is I think the theology on hell is shaky.
Mm.
I
Okay.
think that's a shaky one. Um, I think it's been made into something that the text doesn't necessarily say it is. And I think a lot of that comes from things like Dante's Inferno and
Right.
these kind of Western ideas of, hell being this never-ending torture chamber,
Okay.
which I have a hard time settling. I always have. And kind of going through Bema and some of the Bible Project, I'm realizing like, well, maybe it's not settled, like maybe we're adding things that don't need to be added, right?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's one of them. And we could
I
go a little deeper into that,
maybe,
a
yeah.
little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, again, he's not an expert. It's stuff he's just learning about.
Yes. Another thing is, I think Satan is
Yeah.
another thing that we kind of make a lot out of, but when you start to understand the Hebrew
Yep.
behind the word Satan, right? Um, as being a opposition, right? What's
It is accuser, but
accuser?
so, and I know what you're talking about here, because Heiser puts a lot of emphasis on this too. But like the Satan in Job,
Hmm.
there's actually no reason to believe that that is the same Satan as uh who we'd consider the devil or Lucifer or whatever.
Yeah.
There's reason to believe that there's multiple spirits that are considered accusers.
Yeah, which is another big wrestling match that I'm working through. God is not deceptive, right?
Yeah.
God is not trying to lead people astray yet in his throne room and his divine council or whatever. There seems to be these spirits that he's willing to utilize, to use, in Kings.
Who was it? Jehoshaphat, maybe?
I think it's
Ahab,
Ahaz.
that's it.
He's basically wanting to convince Ahaz to go into battle,
Hmm.
right? And he's got his divine council, his generals or whatever you want to think of it as. And he says, like, who's gonna go down and convince him to die,
Yeah.
basically? And
Who's going
I
to give him a
mean,
false prophecy,
it
effectively?
says, like one spirit said this and another said that. And then finally, the spirit came forth and said, I will go down and be a deceiving spirit
Yeah.
and basically convince Ahaz through deception,
Yeah.
which is just like, it's a big curveball when you really stop and think about it. Like, wait, 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 wait. That's the devil's job, right? Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's lots of things like that have popped up that I have yet to really settle in my mind, and I think that's okay. I think as Westerners, Western thinkers, I think Bema talks about this a bit, is we value an answer. We want a good doctrine. We want a
Yep.
good theology that provides the answer. whereas an Eastern thinker values the wrestling match.
Yeah.
We want the question. We want to constantly be wrestling through these things.
Yep.
And for me, that wrestling match ends as soon as you put in a theology that answers your question.
Yeah.
And it's usually so much deeper, but we've gotten very good at just kind of slapping band-aid answers on people's questions instead of really diving into the process with them,
Yep.
and I think if I had been given those tools to dive into the process at a younger age, I might have kind of saved myself some pain,
It's a headache.
walking through adulthood.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I was given pretty standard theology, pretty
Yep.
standard doctrine. It was, I mean, mostly I was raised in a Foursquare church, which is kind of in the middle as far as being like charismatic or more orthodox, I guess,
Okay. Yeah.
traditional. At least my experience with it. Um, but I just wasn't satisfied, I guess. I wasn't satisfied with
Yeah.
the answers. They did not fill me up. They did not equip me enough for adulthood. And I think, and that's not to blame the church, like I had my own part to play and I didn't do the best job of really seeking after God, even though I was, I learned how to speak Christian. I learned how to say the right things. I became a youth leader, when I was a kid and I felt all good about myself. But,
Yeah.
you know, life happens and suddenly I don't know, it was a weird thing. When I became an adult, I started hanging out with a group of people, started smoking weed and drinking alcohol, and I thought, um, these people accept me.
That's it.
Like
That's the key though.
these people accept me, but what they're accepting is all the sin that I want to be a part of, like
Hmm.
um so
But there's a craving for acceptance in all of us,
yeah,
and
and when
that's usually
you're
the
a
thing.
teenager dealing with what teenagers deal with, um, pornography and just general selfishness and being self-absorbed like teenagers usually are. Um, yeah, you kind of feel unaccepted in the church. You kind of feel like
Yep.
you're different. You're not going, I don't know, you're not going to be accepted if you express
Well,
what you're struggling with, which isn't true. And I'm sure there was people around me that I could have kind of been more open with. But I just didn't feel like I could.
yeah, the message is usually like, hey, don't do this, and like you're failing if you do this or whatever. And the reality is it needs to be more relational. Like, hey, like this is why you don't want to do this. And like
Mhm.
if you're going through it, like let's talk through it. Be like let's wrestle through it. And that's the thing is I was gonna try to find one of the quotes out of that book by Marty Solomon, the Bama guy, and he's talking about the whole wrestling process of like
Mhm.
most people in the church, especially when it comes to stuff like this, like as soon as you start to say you're questioning through something, immediately they just equate it to like, oh, well, you're questioning your faith, like you're gonna walk away from the faith. There's that trigger word, deconstruction.
Mhm.
Everybody always thinks like, oh, well, you're just going to walk away from the faith as soon as you start asking questions. It's like,
Yeah.
actually, if you ask the right questions and if you are truly honest and actually seeking, earnestly, then, like me and you're going to have a stronger faith afterwards.
Mhm.
And that's what he talks about in that book there. But, uh, but yeah, man, like you were talking about how the Eastern mindset is more so like encouraging the wrestle so that because like we all know that I could give somebody information and they may whatever it's the give a man a fish or
Mhm.
or teach him how to fish, and it's the same thing with like learning biblical concepts and stuff. Like the Eastern Hebraic mindset was more so like, hey, we're not going to write out tit for tat what happened historically. We're going to write things in a way that provokes people to ask the right questions so that they can lead themselves to the conclusion that like God is good and and
Mhm.
and the wrestle is good and the nature of God is this and et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And it's it allows for a much deeper conviction within you once
Hmm.
you get there yourself.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the Inception thing. Like in the Inception movies, he's like, yeah, you could tell somebody something, or you could like plant a seed, but if it's better if they feel like they got there
Yeah.
themselves, you
Yeah.
know. You can lead them there and then let them figure out like, oh, what's the truth? And once
Yeah.
they feel like they've grasped it, they're gonna hold on to it better.
Absolutely. Yeah. Which requires a wrestling,
Yeah.
you know?
Which, and if you're the personality type like me, you actually prefer the wrestle. And it's not because you're trying to be like contentious on purpose. Like I'm not trying to like be rude or an ass. Like
Hmm.
I am trying to dig through and poke and prod because like that it allows for a deepening. It like it allows for something much more settled,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think a lot of times, like with apologetics, we go at it the wrong way. Like the creation story, for example, right? Like we want to use the creation story as being science, as explaining how exactly the earth was created in 7 days,
Yeah.
6 days, and then he rested. And we try to make these things fit within science, right? Within what we know about evolution. And, you run into like the new world theory or the old world theory,
Yep.
all these things, but that's not doesn't appear to be what the authors were doing
Yeah.
when they wrote it. It's a book of poetry, and it does not mean it is any less true,
Right.
right? It's using imagery to explain something about God and
Yes.
humankind. It's using imagery to explain kind of the process that took place to lead us where we're at. And it's not a detailed account of how creation happened.
Hmm.
There's truth and wisdom in it, but we cannot place it in our own box. Like we can't just say like this is how it is, and if you don't accept it, then you don't believe properly. So yeah, that's been another big thing that I've kind of been adjusting to, is not seeing the Bible as completely literal all the time,
Right.
which is weird because I think most of the church can accept that in certain cases, right?
Yeah.
Like there's certain prophecies contained within a text, that's like, well, clearly that didn't actually happen. So they can kind of acknowledge, like, yeah, maybe that's just kind of, hyperbolic,
Yeah.
and like that's just telling them what it's going to be like, not what it's going to actually be. But when you run in to Genesis, the creation story, and the end of the book, Revelation, right? It's like, okay, like maybe this isn't entirely literal.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's any less true. I
Yeah.
believe that the scriptures are inspired. I believe that it is God's word, and I don't really believe it contradicts itself at all. But with that being said, I think I think we should maybe put more thought into what it's actually saying,
Yeah.
and the idea that Revelation is actually really talking about the people in that time during that context, talking about Rome, right? Talking about the Caesar, talking about people that aren't us, and like it's for me, it's like God operates the same as he did then,
Yeah.
right? So these things are bound to kind of repeat themselves in some way, right? So if mankind reaches a certain, level of sin, right? Depravity, then God is going to act, right?
Yep.
And so I'm not saying like there's not going to be a final judgment. I still think there is a final judgment coming, but I just don't think the book of Revelation is painting a detailed picture of how the end of days are going to look for us.
Yeah.
What do you think about preterism? Just
It's still something I'm wrestling through. I was actually listening to somebody the other day, and he tried to make the case that Paul debunks preterism, but I was like, the problem with that is that all of Paul's letters are before the temple was destroyed.
Hmm.
So you can't actually make that case like as well as you're wanting to.
Yeah.
And then he tried to make the claim that like a lot of the star symbology of like the stars falling from heaven and the mountains being cast in the sea and being no more and all that stuff, like that it like he like mocked the idea that it could be symbolistic. And I'm like, I don't know that I agree. The more that I learn about especially like with Genesis and Exodus, Deuteronomy, and like the beginning of the Bible, and then the prophets and everything else, I'm realizing like there's so much more that is symbolistic.
Hmm.
And I've been seeing these memes. I actually did a follow-up interview with Nick
Mm.
the other day, and we talked a little bit about like where I'm at with this. And I'm not sure where I'm at, but preterism is for that reason making more and more sense to me.
Yeah.
Whether or not I would say like, oh, full preterism, partial preterism, I honestly don't know. And I was telling him the same thing. I hold everything very loosely, and I think you do
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know that I know any of this, but I'm starting to lean towards certain things, and I'm starting to realize like regardless of what Revelation is, it's absolutely not what we think it is.
No.
Like,
Yeah.
especially in our modern English understanding, because that's the other problem is we approach it from an English understanding and
Hmm.
a Greek mindset, when in
Yeah.
reality, even though it was written in Greek, it was coming from a very Hebraic mindset.
Hmm.
And so I don't think without getting into Hebraic culture and comprehension, I don't think that we can even get close.
Yeah.
And so the more that I learn about the Hebrew mindset and all that stuff, the more I'm like, yeah, I'm not totally sure the dispensationalists have it right?
Yeah. And yeah, the Western way of seeing these things, I don't think it gives you the best perspective on how to live. I see a lot of times we kind of adopt this end times, like, oh, I'm just waiting for Jesus to come back and fix everything.
Yep.
When in my mind, it works a lot better as, we are in the time where the kingdom of heaven has come, right?
Yeah.
Jesus came and immediately said,
It
repent,
is here.
rejoice, the kingdom of heaven is here. So like what does that mean? For me, it means that we need to be partnering with God on making this world a better place,
I agree.
right? Which can feel overwhelming, but we can do that in kind of unsuspecting ways,
Yeah.
right? A lot of what Jesus talks about, like with the mustard seed and all these um, gosh, the parables that
Yeah.
he uses, they kind of they paint a picture that's counterintuitive, right? It's not Jesus coming with a sword and crushing his enemies by force. He
Yeah.
goes about it through a different way. So I think for me, it's the smaller things. I mean, they seem small to us with our world perspective, but I think raising a family, raising your kids right. I mean, that is going to advance the kingdom of heaven.
Yep.
And you might not see the result in your lifetime, but like I want to be in a mindset that's partnering with generations from now.
Dude.
Like I
Yep.
don't I don't want to just think about like what can I do now? Well, in a way I am, but I want to think what am I doing now that's going to pass on
Yeah.
to my future grandkids, to their grandkids, like how can I help further, God's agenda, God's plan on this earth. And it's motivating for me to not just be sitting around waiting for Jesus to come back
Amen.
and, oh, the world's just going to hell in a handbasket kind of mindset, when it's like, well, maybe we have a mission here. Maybe
Yeah.
there's a purpose that I'm here, and it's not just waiting around.
Yep.
And,
And maybe all the fear mongering happening in the higher ups doesn't actually affect us as much as we think it does.
no, yeah,
Like it
yeah.
does, but also it doesn't have to. Like realistically, a lot of it we give power to by leaning into it,
Hmm.
really. But it's hilarious, dude. I just interviewed my buddy from over in England today as well. And we were talking a little bit about legacy. And and he was talking about how like David dreamt of the temple, but it was Solomon that got to build it, you know?
Hmm.
And it's like that idea has been provoking me lately because, as you know, I'm about to have a kid
Yeah.
and it's like, holy crap. Like I I'm sure I'll see a lot of the dreams of my life come to fruition, but I
Yeah.
think a lot of the things that God's put on my heart, like it's gonna be a torch that's handed on,
Yeah.
to my kiddos and to, anybody that I get the the blessing to teach along the
Yeah.
way.
Hmm.
And it's just that it's a wild thought, like just
Yeah.
thinking about that
I
even.
mean, think about like where Abraham must have been at, like he was promised nations.
Yeah.
Like he was promised,
And he
to
got
to
2 kids.
acquire this land, right? And these nations of descendants and all that. And what did he get to see? Yeah, 2 kids, like he it took time
Yeah.
for that promise to come to fruition. And I think we're kind of in a similar space right now. And like as far as the world seems like it's gone, as out of control as it might seem, like this is not new territory for
Yeah.
God. Like he's seen it. I mean, this is a pattern. I mean,
Yeah.
it has always been kind of that kingdom versus empire. And it's never worked the way people thought it was going to work. Yet God always wins.
Yeah.
He always prevails. So like why am I worried about, Trump? Why am I worried about Elon Musk right now when I know that God has a plan,
Yeah.
and the best thing I can do is settle my mind and just kind of get close to the Spirit and try to live like Jesus lived and let His will be done.
Yeah.
And God likes to use people, so like I just want to be an open vessel to be used, so
Yeah, I mean, that's been a theme lately. A couple of the conversations I've had for this podcast, because I'm stacking them up, getting ready. But like the theme of recognize, like I guess recentering the focus, because you know me, I tend to get very like justice oriented.
mhm,
As soon as I see like the nonsense going on in the world, I'm just like, I need to say something. I need to
yeah,
start swinging fists a little
yeah,
bit,
yeah,
metaphorical fists. And the reality is that's actually only beneficial if I genuinely feel like the Lord's leading me to it. If I'm just doing it in my own anger,
mhm,
it's not really beneficial at all. And I think it's good to pay attention. But something I just keep quoting Marty because he's awesome. But he said wisdom isn't knowing what is true, it's knowing when it's true.
mhm,
And I was like, that's fantastic.
yeah,
And it is true. Like you should pay attention.
yeah,
But on the flip side, what else is true is you should not pay attention.
yeah,
Because once it starts to fill you with anxiety and start to overtake your thoughts and everything else like that, then it's no longer beneficial to
mhm,
pay attention. It is beneficial when it's like, okay, now I know how to act in the world. Like maybe now I know what to do as far as like how I want to look at the voting system and how I want to interact with it, or how I want to interact in the legal system, or how I want to like do I want to wait to get a mortgage because of
yeah,
what's happening in the economy? But as soon as it overtakes you and becomes like a point of contention that you don't feel like necessarily maybe the Lord's leading you to, but you're just out of your own anger speaking about, then it's no longer beneficial to be paying attention. And
yeah,
so it is wisdom to pay attention
yeah,
sometimes, but it's also wisdom to just ignore it all sometimes
yeah.
and remember
There,
that the Lord's going to take care of it all.
yeah. Yeah, there's a balance for sure. I mean, you see the prophets rising up and they all had a fire. They were not holding their punches. But I think they were able to do that effectively because God was with them,
Yeah.
right? But a lot of times we want to play the prophet, but we're not actually receiving that word from the spirit, you know.
Yep.
So it can be more harmful. You can win an argument and nobody wins, you know. Like you both walk away because what did you do to better that person that you were arguing with?
Yeah.
Like crushing people with arguments is not going to do any good for them, you know. Maybe sometimes it can. I don't know. But yeah, this is my mind. I'm always like saying things and then like maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe that's not right.
That's good though.
But yeah, I mean the prophets definitely had a fire, you know, and that's something I think I could use more of, you know, but just a more passion and a ability to speak out against injustice, but yeah, I think understanding that what we are in America is empire.
Yeah.
You know, like if it is not a part of the kingdom of heaven, then it is empire, you know, and like we like to prop certain systems up like they're good, you
Explain
know, like
that.
they're
Explain the
beneficial.
empire thing.
So the idea of empire, it starts with Egypt, really is the first. I mean, it kind of you see signs of it within like the Tower of Babel, right? It's basically society coming together and making gods of themselves,
Yeah.
right? They basically forsake the idea of like we need to rely on God, and they go, we need to take care of ourselves. We need to build an empire. We need to build a tower. We need to build a society and become gods. Take care of our own self, right? It's the best I can explain it, anyways. But
Yeah.
there's the other side of like shalom, or I like to think of it as kingdom, which is God's way of operating in the world, and it's God's, you know, it's what God wants us to live out. And yeah, I think we, as in America, I think our society looks a whole lot more like Egypt right now. You know, it looks more. It's hard because I am grateful for the freedoms that we have. I'm grateful that we get the opportunity to come together, even doing this and being able to broadcast it,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
It's pretty rad. And not a lot of places. I mean, there are some places that this is not okay,
Yeah.
right? You would be thrown in jail. There are places where you cannot get together and worship. There, you know, so I am very grateful for where I am, and I don't
Yes.
want to, you know, completely trash America
Yeah.
and all of it.
We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
No, absolutely. But I think our government right now, I mean, it looks like empire to me.
Mhm.
It looks like people that are not relying on God, and I don't I don't know. I'm not making any big claims on like who to vote for or whether or not you should vote, you know, but like I think it would just do us good to acknowledge like, okay, maybe I'm casting a vote for this person, but to kind of acknowledge that there's a bigger priority in our life, you know, like when all we're paying attention to is the news, you know, and the latest drama between Trump and Elon Musk or whatever, you know,
Mm.
it's like that's not going to do much to benefit me. I mean, it can help you to learn how to identify with people and learn what society's going through, and
Mhm.
but everything other than that to me is just like I want the center of my life to be around God. And I think that's kind of what the Shema prayer is getting at, right? Like, you know, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, right? And you know, it goes into like do these practices and press this on your heart and your kids and put it on your gates, you know, and your
Mhm.
doors. And those are a call to remember, you know, where your center is, you know, and sometimes we need those physical signs, you know,
Yep.
those reminders in our life to kind of reset our focus. Because I mean, I can't count how many times, even since I've come back to the church, I've just slipped into the same way of thinking
Yeah.
where I'm absorbed with politics, or I'm absorbed with, you know, just random scrolling,
Yeah.
you know, and then like just before I know it, I've spent a week of my nights just looking at stupid comedy videos, you know, that don't do anything to fill me up. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think yeah, it's been a big part of my growth is just kind of realizing like, this world is it's operating an empire right now, and I want to be set apart. God's calling its church to operate differently. It's
Yeah.
calling his church to operate through shalom, through peace, and rely on God. And I think the second we kind of encourage or support the idea of our government stepping in, right? And taking care of the people instead of taking that burden
Yeah.
upon ourselves, like we're kind of in trouble
Yeah.
here.
The church should be doing a lot more than the government does.
Yeah. So speaking of justice, I've been thinking about. So I've been reading through the prophets, obviously, but I had this idea um, about kind of comparing the prophets to Deuteronomy,
Okay.
right? Like a compare and contrast kind of deal. So you go through Deuteronomy, right? And over again, it talks about this idea of remembering.
Mm-hmm.
Remember who you are, remember where you come from, remember who your God is and what God has done for you,
Yeah.
right? Do that so you can provide justice properly, right?
Yes.
You need to remember that you were once the alien, the orphan, and the widow to properly take care of the alien, orphan, and the widow, right? The oppressed, the people that have nowhere to go. And then you get in the prophets and you start seeing that same pattern. A lot of times, I think when I grew up, I thought of the prophets as kind of future tellers that were dealing with idolatry, which there is idolatry in the prophets. But
Yes.
um, I feel like a big majority of it is an injustice problem that they're talking about. You're not treating the oppressed right. You're
Yeah.
not remembering who you were, where you came from, and you've become the same empire, the same kind of thing that I pulled you out of, right? You're trampling on the alien,
Mm-hmm.
you're not taking care of those in need. So
That's the same thing with I mean Psalm 82 when God's like it's God basically throwing down the Elohim.
mhm,
It's because they created systems of injustice.
mhm,
It's and then became idols effectively,
yeah,
but they were meant to lead people towards justice and towards, loving their neighbor well and all that. And it's because they failed at a lot of that. It's something else that Bema talks a lot about is, and I've seen in other places, is that like when you look at like the let's see, Sodom and Gomorrah,
mhm,
or with Lot and everything else, or some of these other times where the Lord comes in and just utterly like destroys someplace. It's not because of their sin that he comes down. It's
mhm,
because he hears the cry of those who have been persecuted.
yeah,
And he says, all right, I'm going to go down and I'm going to look and I'm going to see how bad it actually is, right? And so the mindset uh, that like if we're sinning too much, God's gonna obliterate us. It's that's not as likely as if you are treating people like trash,
yeah.
then he might obliterate
Mhm.
you.
Yeah. And how often in the prophets do you read that the Israelites are still doing all of the faith practices? They're still making sacrifices, and God's straight up saying, like, I am so sick and tired of your sacrifices because you aren't learning, you
Yeah.
aren't changing, you are not dealing with justice properly. I don't care if you got your worship right, like clearly it's not working,
I
so.
desire mercy, not sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so reading through all of that, I've been confronted with this question of how do we in today's world, in our Western context, take care of the alien, the orphan, and the widow, right? Because in my mind, immediately I go towards this place of those people were different back then, right?
Mm,
Like you had to want to live to make it back in those days, right? Like
okay.
you had to have some drive to live and contribute, like you weren't getting the government coming along and giving you a free ride. basically.
Right, right.
So is it the same process? How do we in today's world take care of the alien, orphan, and the widow? And we can do that in kind of like a very condensed, temporary way. Give a guy a sandwich that's probably hungry. And maybe that does more than we know. I mean, that's very possible. But for me, it's like, how do I know if I'm taking care of them or enabling them?
Mm,
Like my pastor was just talking about the seventh commandment, do not steal, and he was diving deeper into this idea that when you are just receiving and not contributing, that is a form of of stealing.
mm,
It's kind of like, you're just taking what society has to offer. You're appreciating, this money coming into your pocket, but when you're not actually doing anything to
yeah.
contribute back to society, it's a form of stealing, you
Okay.
know? Um, and he kind of goes into like, a lot of people want to enjoy the pleasures of church and learning, and they don't care to contribute their talents, their gifts. They don't care to, I mean, tithing is a part of that, I think. And a lot of times, we want to receive, we don't want to give. But yeah, anyways, back to the question. I'm not sure how to effectively help people
Yeah.
anymore. Like I don't have the means to provide housing for these people, like
Right.
I don't. So, yeah, that's what I'm wrestling with. Any thoughts on that?
I don't know, but what you just said about people not contributing back, like I was immediately reminded of the parable of the talents.
Hmm.
You know, some were gifted with something, and you could argue that what you get out of your church culture is maybe the Lord giving you talents to reinvest.
Uh-huh.
And then if you refuse to reinvest them, then what if that's a version of you know burying your talents?
Yeah.
That was a thought that I had just now. But
Yeah.
as far as how to how to take care of people, I guess it comes back a little bit. It comes back to wisdom of like knowing when to or when
Hmm.
or how and to deal with different things. I think for starters, I think it has a lot to do with maybe restructuring the way our churches operate because I think in Acts what we see is people would pull everything together and then out of that they would take care of others. So I don't think that it is a necessarily a each person does what they can.
Hmm.
Like you said, maybe a meal or maybe taking care of people or like helping people out when they're going through struggles or when they've just had a kid or when they whatever. And doing what you can if you can. But I think a lot of it probably does come back to I think our church at large needs to be significantly better about this. And I'm not saying that the church is always bad about this. I mean, clearly a lot of our, I guess, prosperity gospel churches suck at it. And but there are a lot of churches out there that reinvest in the community. Now, what they should prioritize, I don't know that I can say, but clearly there's issues. I mean, I know one issue as far as like the not orphan, but the
The alien
no the program where kids bounce from house to house. What's that called again? Um,
foster care.
there it is, foster. The the statistically speaking, if the church stepped in to the foster care system and took care of these kids,
Hmm.
there's more than enough people in the church to take care of these kids.
Yeah.
And if, I don't even recall, but it's just astronomical the amount of Christians that have the means to do it, that could do it, and all the kids would be out of the foster care system in no time. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So things like that, I think we, as a culture in general, especially in our Western culture, we probably need to make it more of a culture to actually do these things. Now,
Yeah.
how do we do that? Probably teaching like putting an emphasis on selflessness.
Hmm.
But it's tricky because I mean, you just bring up tithe, and most people are like, "Oh, that guy's manipulating me
Yeah.
into
Yeah, I felt that.
stealing all my money." And and sometimes that they are maybe,
Yeah.
but on the flip side, yeah, even if you're not comfortable giving your money to the church, like there is a precedence, like be generous with your money. So like,
Hmm.
okay, maybe don't like if you have a rub against giving your money to the church, maybe actually invest it in.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I do think culturally we need to take a better stand on some of this. And maybe there's some churches that could spend a lot less on sound systems and lighting systems and maybe
Yeah.
invest it back in. But on the flip side, this is another thing that I struggled with for a while because I struggled with the same thing. I was like, I don't know if tithe is actually a New Testament idea. And somebody pointed out to me that tithe was actually pre-Old Covenant too. So
Yeah.
my argument was kind of moot.
Yeah. Old
Uh,
Melchizedek.
yep.
Hmm.
Yep. But I was thinking about, and I was struggling with the fact that churches a lot of times will have expensive sound systems and expensive all this other stuff. But then I realized I was like, you don't just tithe your money, you sometimes tithe your time. And what if somebody is gifted in music or somebody is gifted in you know, sound design
Yeah.
or somebody's gifted in graphic arts and whatnot, and they wish to tithe their time to the church for these things. Like it isn't necessarily bad that somebody invests in the sound system, that it isn't bad that somebody invests in their talent and does the thing. And so that was something that I know that personally I struggled with for a long time. I was like, this is kind of it's a little too much, which
Yeah.
but on the flip side, I was like, I've had all these worship experiences in these great sound design to air the rooms and like big loud worship moments where I'm like, okay, God literally showed up. So I'd go back and forth, and that's where I think I tipped from like churches shouldn't have this to like no, actually maybe they should because it allows people to use their talents in the church instead of going out in the street, and that's an aside, obviously. But maybe even within that, like bringing here's something that we very well could do. I think that might be practical, is bringing people that don't have a way to make an income for themselves and teaching them skills to do so. You know, I mean, on the one hand, a lot of homeless people are homeless just because they won't get off their drugs,
Yeah.
and so that's one issue. But there are people that they're in a hard spot because they simply don't have the skills to bring themselves out. Like they could go get a McDonald's job, but that's not going to do them much good. So maybe if you've got a shop and you could bring somebody in and teach them how to weld and
Hmm.
invest in them, stuff like that. I don't know. But those are some things that I'm coming up with on the top of my
Yeah,
head.
there is a path. There's a path out of it. And yeah, I don't know. I was thinking the other day, I think there's something or a little over 1,000 homeless people in Reading, somewhere around there, and there's well over 100 churches.
Hmm.
Let's drop it down to just a flat 100, so if each church just takes care of 10 people, like you've kind of cleaned up the homeless problem in a way. And I know it's easier said than done,
Right.
obviously. There's a whole lot of, you know, culture that you're coming up against, and it's hard to help people that don't want your
Yes.
help. So I mean it is a battle, but I think it's a battle worth praying about,
Yeah.
worth imagining what it could look like if we weren't just dependent on a government to fix our messes.
I
What
agree.
does it look like for the kingdom of God to step in and start, like we talked about, partnering together and making this world a better place. So, yeah, that's something I've been kind of thinking about lately.
I like it. I like it. It's good. Something that I feel like you're pretty decent at is you do take the time to talk to your guys at work that you work with, and you make a point to, bring up your faith and stuff. And a lot of people sort of fear that, and they don't know how to, like, they feel like they have to I don't know, have all the answers. They feel like they have to have a certain presentation of how they, whatever. But how do you do it?
It's pretty simple actually. I think the most powerful tool is to ask people questions.
Yes.
People love to talk. They love to talk about themselves more than anything. So, um, it can be as simple, and mostly what I've done at work is ask, like, what do you believe in? You know?
Yeah.
And then they'll just start talking. Maybe I used to go to church, but I don't really believe that anymore. And then there's a door. It's
Yeah.
an open door at that point. Well, what happened with church? Why didn't, what happened? And then they'll talk about it and they'll start pointing out things that they don't like about the church. And then it leaves you a big opening. And it's like, well, Jesus doesn't like those things either, right? Like you're on the same page with Jesus right now when you're saying these things. And for me, that's been an easy go-to.
Yeah.
Like a lot, like I'm not going in looking for an argument. I'm there to get them turning their wheels. I'm there to ask a question, a simple question. What do you believe in? You
Yeah.
know, and you'd be shocked how many people you can tell have not thought about that question. And there's a story that I heard about this old rabbi around Jesus's time. It was after Jesus, but he was walking home one night, and there was a little Roman outpost, and it was in the middle of the night, super dark, and he just heard this voice cry out, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And the rabbi's like, "What?" And the voice cries out again, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And then the rabbi responds with, "How much do you get paid to stand there and ask that question?" And he says, like 3 denarii a week or something like that. I don't remember the currency that they're
Right.
using
Right.
or how much it was. And the rabbi says, "I'll double it if you stand outside of my door and ask me the same question every morning. Who are you? What are you doing here?" And like there's such a benefit just to asking yourself, who am I and what am I doing here? So if I can get those wheels turning in somebody's mind, who am I? What am I doing here? What's my purpose? Because that's what hit me when I had my son. I was so far away from the church. I think we've talked about it, but I would have gladly tried to talk anybody out of their faith. I thought it was stupid. I thought the church was, just a bunch of greedy fear mongers, and I didn't want any part of it. When I had my son, I came into a place of kind of existential dread, which is kind of a weird thing to have that joyful moment of love that I couldn't comprehend, followed up by like, oh no, like I don't know what's going on. I don't understand reality. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what I'm going to teach my son.
Ooh.
I don't know because eventually he's going to have questions that I don't have answers for. And so I went through a long road, right? I think I've talked to you about. I mean, I got into Alan Watts, who's like this guru guy. He's became a big deal recently again,
Yep.
but got really into him, and I was trying to like model my life after the more Hindu way or whatever. But then eventually I realized like the people that are, more advanced in this belief, I guess, the way they live is not desirable to me. It's
Mm.
more of like they're just like all about the spirit. The flesh is kind of like not good, right?
Sort of Gnostic. Yeah.
Yeah, very Gnostic. And it's like, I don't want to be them. Like, I can't raise my kid like that, Like, what am I just gonna like sit there all somber all the time? And so I wasn't satisfied with that. And then I kind of started looking around. I was reading through the Quran. I was like seriously thinking about trying to become a Muslim for some reason, which is great. That's how far I was from wanting to be a Christian again, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of people that are seeking that out right now, though.
Yeah,
It's
and
wild.
I think the state of our world is pushing people to have these questions. Like it's starting to become more clear and obvious that there's something deeper going on. And I think in Revelation it says, I think it's Revelation that um, there will be a time when people like advance in knowledge, right? And I think that that's pretty applicable to today. We have more access to knowledge than ever. And
Yeah.
that can be a double-edged sword, right? Because you can stumble on, sources that aren't going to be good or beneficial for you. But if you're actively seeking truth, you will find it. And there's
Amen.
so many resources like BEMA, the Bible Project. There's so many good churches out there that are willing to walk with you and come side by side and walk you through this walk of faith. And yeah, so anyways, what was it? Oh, my son was born and existential dread set in.
Yeah.
I went through this long path of kind of seeking truth, and sure enough, seek and ye shall find. I started listening to a podcast called it was something about apologetics. I
Okay.
forget what it was called. Thomas Fretwell is the guy, and yeah, I don't know. It kind of came from I was listening to through the Quran and reading the Quran, and I just kept coming across things that just like did not sit well with me at all. It just
Because
like,
they shouldn't.
yeah, it's just like this is weird. Oh, like this is so weird. So I was like, I think I actually started by listening through to the Bible on the Bible app or whatever. And immediately I started with Genesis and I was like, this is beautiful. Like I don't know what it was, but something just spoke to me. And then I started listening. Oh, it's called Theology and Apologetics
Okay.
with Thomas Fretwell. And I liked what he was saying, and he recommended Mere Christianity. He
Hmm.
said, like, if you are a believer, this should be like mandatory reading, basically.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, I'll try that out. And somewhere around halfway through that book, he basically offers like, if you want this, you can have it right now. And I was just like, I do. I really do want
That's
this.
awesome.
This is the first time things kind of make sense to me,
That's dope.
and this is the first time I have been given answers and not just more vague questions about what God is, what I'm doing here. Um, and so from that point, I just kind of dove in, and it was a rocky road coming back to it, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's to be
Seasons
expected.
seasons of dryness for sure, but I always kept coming back, which is such a you know beautiful offer that God always has on the table. You can always turn,
Yeah.
you can always repent, and He's right there.
That's amazing.
Which, side note, that's always been the offer. Old Testament, New Testament, there was always a way back.
Yeah.
He's pleading with them constantly through the Old Testament, like, just stop, turn around, come back to me,
Yeah.
So it's kind of something I've noticed recently, because we seem to think the Old Testament God is something different and doesn't care, and he just wants to bring wrath and justice, but doesn't seem that way to me.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, I think that is a valuable tool. Just get somebody to ask that question in their head. What do I believe?
Oh yeah, that was the question I had asked.
Yeah. I'm coming back around to
Back.
it slowly, but yeah, when I'm not knowledgeable enough to bring an argument to the table, to debate somebody on atheism and really get at the heart, of like what they're dealing with. But it's easy to ask a question. What do you believe?
Yeah. I
What are
think
you about?
I think that relational approach is gonna win more often than any other approach 9 times out of 10 anyway.
Hmm.
Unless the Lord leads somebody into uh, like a more argument or even a street preach or something like that. I don't
Yeah.
think it's going to be as beneficial as a relationship with somebody and just asking good questions.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm the same way. Anytime I want to have a conversation about this stuff, I do it relationally. But that's awesome. I actually didn't I don't know that you told me about the mere Christianity part and how that was how you kind of were like
Yeah.
C.S.
C.S.
Lewis.
Lewis is a genius. We
Yeah,
need more people like him today, I think.
agreed.
Yeah. So ahead of his time, it seemed like,
Yeah.
like he was, yeah. It's incredible. Read that book. If
Oh
you
yeah.
haven't read the book, go read Mere
I,
Christianity.
yeah, I've got it. I started it. But I'm working my way through Lord of the Rings right now.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
on the third book.
Also
And
excellent.
yes. But yeah, you did all that and now you're looking at going to school. Oh, I gotta reply to that email.
Yeah, you got it?
Yeah,
Cool.
but yeah, now you're looking to go to school and possibly getting into ministry down the line.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is that actually, in large part, was born out of my relationships at work, oddly enough.
Huh.
I began asking those questions, what are you about? What do you believe in? Why do you think we're here? Not pushing conversation, but just there's plenty of time to talk to people
Oh
when
yeah.
you're working side by side with them. And then eventually they start coming to you with questions or, like, what do you think about this? Like, what do you think, you know, what would the church or what does your faith say about this subject? Or,
Yeah.
a lot of the times it's almost in attempts to poke fun. I feel like, like, what do you think about, would your church approve of me doing this? And it's like, no, don't do that, please. Like, but sometimes there's genuine questions that people
Right.
have, and they might not realize there's that opportunity to ask them unless you open that door. So I opened the door, and that kind of led to certain people kind of coming to me and asking about faith and what it is I believe. And slowly, more and more people at work, which a lot of them aren't believers, were like, you should be a pastor. And I was like, no, no way. I still feel that way, to be honest. Like I don't want to do that. I don't feel like I'm equipped to do that. It's not part of my personality. I don't love speaking
Yeah.
in front of people. This is a lot for me right now. I'm sorry if I'm babbling, but
Dude, honestly, you're coherent. You're more coherent than I think you realize.
all right, that's good. But I have stage fright. I have all of that, which is funny because I play music. I love playing music in front of people. But speaking
Yeah.
your thoughts and being vulnerable like that it's a different thing.
Oh
So,
yeah.
but more and more people kept saying you should be a pastor. Like you obviously have a passion for it. Like you obviously have a desire to learn. So
Yeah.
like, why not teach? And I was just like, all right, whatever. And then my pastor comes to me and basically, I don't know if it was a prophetic word or just, something he was thinking, but he's like, I really think you're called to ministry.
Yeah.
And um,
And I kept poking and
you
prodding at you a
kept
little
you
bit.
kept poking me. You kept poking me, and honestly, you inspired me in a lot of ways. Like
Thanks, man.
you have a courage just to go for it, which is something I lack. So to hear about your story and what you've done, it's been kind of motivating. Um, and it doesn't seem like you have a lot of like care as far as like, maybe this is wrong. You're just gonna go for it, which I'm sure has had its ups and its downs in
Yep.
life. But I admire that. And you always kept pulling me aside to talk about your new ideas, and we would kind of dive into conversations together, and you would kind of share like your interest in serving the Lord. And I'm not sure if you're fully aware of what that looks like yet,
Still
but
don't, but we'll see.
I'm sure it's going to happen in your
Mm.
life, and it might look different than we expect, but I don't know in what capacity I'm going to be serving
Mm.
in ministry, but I know I have a passion for it. I want to devote my life to, like I talked about earlier, just being centered around God. And I don't know, part of me feels bad because it's like a way out of the world. It's like the easy way to dive into ministry and just like get paid
To
to
study.
to study, but I don't know.
Yeah.
The more I wrestle with it, the more I realize like this isn't my own desire,
Mm.
really, like this is something I feel like I'm being called to, um, which is kind of an interesting idea. And I think part of why it might be right is because I don't have a big ego that wants to get up and talk to people and preach at people and do all these things. So maybe that's why I'm being called to do it is to, I don't know, bring a different perspective to it, a different process, and I don't know. We'll see what God does with it. But yeah, I've signed up with the Western Ministry Institute, I think it's called, which is like a year-long course, just kind of giving you a foundation of theology, and I'm curious to know where I line up with some of those theologies. Um, I feel like I've done like a pretty deep dive on a lot of the stuff they'll be talking about, so I'm curious to know how it compares and how they will react to maybe some different ideas.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm starting that, and then after that, I'm going to get licensed with the Foursquare Church, and my pastors expressed interest in, coming alongside me and helping me come up with sermons. We're actually starting a church podcast that's just for our church family and being able to connect with people and interview people. And it's kind of giving a better platform to share testimonies and to get to know one another, because our church is Connection Church. That's what it's called. So like, how can we really connect on a deeper level now? Like, we're pretty good at the getting together and enjoying our company and sharing about each other's lives and all that, but like, how do we go a little bit deeper? And so another way you inspired me, you started this podcast, and I'm like, that's a pretty good idea, like, what would that look like? And I talked with my pastor, and we kind of worked through some of the details. But yeah, it's going to be just a podcast for our church, and if other people listen, then great. But it's really just a way for us to get deeper connected and get to know each other.
Which is really cool, actually.
And yeah, a new addition that we've been kind of talking about is kind of having a service companion, like a message companion. So it gives us a little bit room. We get the message on Sunday, and then on Wednesday we release a podcast where we get to dive a little deeper into that. And also, I want to develop a kind of a question and response section to it. So if people have questions about what was taught on Sunday, or any random question within the church, like, we have room to answer that, which you don't have room to do on a 2 hour and a half Sunday service. So that's kind of where I'm heading. I want to be a part in ministry, and for all I know, I could work at Tic Tac for the rest of my life. I don't know, and do ministry as much as I can on, aside from my job and my family and all that, which I think there's a lot more room than we like to think that we have. If you create space, like, there's room for ministry, there's room to give, there's room to grow. So that's kind of what I'm after right now. Be starting this podcast. We'll see how that goes. But keep pursuing ministry and just being open to whatever God has for my life.
It's awesome, man. Yeah. Well, dude, it's been about an hour and a half almost. It's
a
good podcast.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, thanks for coming on, bro.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Thomas. I appreciate it.
If anybody's ever in Reading and they're not trying to go straight to Bethel, Connection Church, that's where you're at.
It's a small church, but it's a good church family.
Yeah.
I like it being smaller. It makes it easy to know people.
Yeah. That's honestly good. I mean, if we weren't about to, I can say this now because by the time this comes out, I'll probably have already moved or be about ready to move, but we're moving to Ohio, and I think if we were sticking around, I probably would consider going to y'all's church just for that reason, because we've been craving roots and community, but we're rolling out, and who even knows, as soon as the kid comes, that starts our countdown timer. So once this comes out, you guys I'll probably already be driving across the country with my father-in-law.
Yeah. Getting far away from me.
well, yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, you've been one of the dudes that I really enjoyed while being out here. Like, it's been fun. We'll have to disc golf a time or two again before I leave. For sure.
That was good.
Thanks for being on the podcast. Thanks for listening, guys. If you enjoyed any of this, share it. And I'll talk to you in the next one.
Bye.